Good wishes to all of you. History of Medieval India, Chapter 20, Assessment and Review audiobook. It's the last chapter of this book. The 1,000 years from the beginning of the 8th century to the end of the 17th century saw important changes in the political, economic, and cultural life of the country and also, to a smaller extent, in its social life. In social life, the caste system continued to dominate despite the challenge posed to it by Islam and the loss of political power by the Rajput rulers, who were duty bound to protect Dharma, which implied, among other things, the upholdings of the fourfold division of our society, Varnashram Dharma. Although the Nath Panthi Jogis and the Bhakti saints vehemently criticized the caste system, they could hardly make a dent in it. A tactic agreement was arrived at in course of time. The criticism of the caste system by the saints did not, with some notable exceptions, extend to day or secular life, while the Brahmins acquiesced in the advocacy of the path of devotion as the way for salvation for the all castes, especially for the Shudras. Many women saints such as Meera and others such as Shudras opened the way of bhakti for women also and allowed them to rise above the task of service and duty to a husband. However, the Brahmins continued to claim a privileged position for themselves, including the exclusive right to preach and educate. Within the framework of caste, new subgroups arose due in part to the absorption of tribal groups into Hinduism, the growth of new professional groups, and also the local and regional feelings. At the same time, the Varna status of castes rose or fell according to the economic and political power of the groups concerned. Rajputs, Marathas, and Khatris may be mentioned in this context. The Bhakti and Sufi saints gradually brought about a better understanding of the fundamental tenets of Hinduism and Islam, underlining the fact that they had a great deal of similarity. This resulted in a greater spirit of mutual harmony and toleration. Although forces advocating a narrow, intolerant approach continued to be strongly entrenched and sometimes influenced state policies, but such occasions were on the whole limited. The Bhakti and Sufi saints also brought about important changes in the approach to religion, laying greater emphasis on true faith than to the formal observances. They also contributed to the growth of regional languages and literature, but the excessive concern with religious and spiritual efforts resulted in a setback to the growth of rational sciences, especially to the cultivation of science and technology. On balance, the position of women worsened. Seclusion of women or purdah became more widespread while Hindu women were not able to claim the right of remarriage or a share in their father's property, which Muslim women had. In fact, these rights tended to be denied more and more even to Muslim women. In the political and economic fields, the most important development was the political and administrative integration of the country, brought about by the Turks and later consolidated by the Mughals. Although the Turks and Mughal system of administration remained largely confined to North India, indirectly it affected other parts of India also. The institution of a well minted currency based on silver, the development of roads and areas, and the preference for city life had a direct effect on the growth of trade and handicrafts, which reached its climax during the 17th century. Under the Mughals, political integration was accompanied by a deliberate efforts to create a unified ruling class consisting of Muslims and Hindus. However, the ruling class remained strongly aristocratic in character, with only limited opportunities of career being open to the people of talent from lower classes. It also remained largely northern in character. Aurangzeb did try to induct large numbers of Marathas and Deccani nobles into the services. The Deccanis were integrated but not the Marathas. Perhaps regional as well as religious and social pressures played a role in this because, unlike the Rajputs in North India, the Maratha Sardars were drawn from social sections which had never exercised political power or been a ruling class, not where they considered Kshatriyas. The Mughal nobility was organized as a bureaucracy dependent on the monarchy. However, it derived its income mainly from lands cultivated by peasants, proprietors for the collection of land revenue from peasants. The nobility depended partly on its military following and partly on the strength of the jamindars, whose rights and privileges were defended and maintained by the state in return for their support. That is why many historians argue that the state is medieval India remained essentially feudal. A significant contribution of the Turks was the defense of the country from Mongol onslaughts during the 13th and 14th centuries. Later, for 200 years, the Mughals were able to secure the northwest frontiers of India from foreign invasions. For this purpose, the defense of India was fixed on the Kabul Ghazni line with the Hindu Kush mountains on the to the north. The politics of Central and West Asia were closely followed, and sometimes an active part was taken. India's reputation as a land of spices and its position as the textile manufacturer of the Eastern world, including East Africa, led the European nations to try to establish direct trade relations with India. The richness of the Oriental trade further whetted the appetite of the European nations and quickened their economic and technological growth. Since they had hardly any commodities to offer which were in demand in the Oriental world, except the silver and gold procured from Central and South America, the European traders, backed by their governments, sought an entry into the internal trade of India and Asia. On a number of occasions, the desire to control Indian territories whose income could be used for the purchase of Indian goods, just like the Dutch who had been able to bring the East Indies, modern Indonesia, under their control. As long as the Mughal Empire was strong, the European nations were not successful in this object. The decline of the Mughal Empire and important political events in India during the 18th century, such as the entry of Nadir Shah and later the Afghans, as well as the rapid economic development of the European nations, enabled them to establish their domination in India as also in many other Asian countries. While scholars have tried to explain the causes of the decline and downfall of the Mughal Empire, the reasons why India, like many other Asian nations, could not develop as rapidly as the European nations in economic and scientific fields needs further detailed study and research. The Mughal ruling classes had no traditions of connection with the sea, while the Mughal rulers were quick to recognize the importance of foreign trade and for that reason extended patronage and support to the European trading companies. They had little understanding of the importance of naval power in the economic development of a nation. India's lagging behind in the field of naval power was a part of its growing backwardness in the field of science and technology. Even the mechanical clock, which brought together all the European inventions in the field of dynamics, was not produced in India during the 17th century. The superiority of Europeans in the field of artillery was freely acknowledged. Even where Indian craftsmen were able to copy European developments, as for example in the field of shipbuilding, little ability to innovate was displayed apart from the attitude of the ruling class to which we have referred. The social structure, historical traditions, and the outlook of various sections are important in this context. There was too much emphasis on past learning and of showing deference to those who were supposed to be the repositories of this knowledge, the Brahmanas and the Mullahs. Akbar's efforts to modernize the syllabus by introducing more science subjects of secular interest were defeated due to the pressure of these elements. The very skill of the Indian artisans and their availability in the large numbers inhibited efforts to develop and apply machine power to productive enterprises. The effect of the caste system in breeding an attitude of insularity and conservatism is, however, a matter of discussion. Thus, India lagged behind the world in the field of science and technology, and the Mughal ruling class remained singularly blind to this development. Like all ruling classes on their way out, the Mughal ruling class was more concerned with matters of immediate concern, including its creature comforts, than matters which would shape the future. Despite this, the developments in various fields in India during the period should not be lost sight of. The growth of political integration was paralleled by cultural integration. Indian society was one of the few societies in the world which was able to develop a more or less unified culture. Despite differences in race, religion, and language, this unified culture was reflected in an outburst of creativity activity which makes the 17th century a second classical age. In the south, the traditions of the Cholas were continued by the Vijayanagara kingdom. The Bahmani kingdom and its successor states also contributed to cultural developments in various fields. The rich cultural developments in the various regional kingdoms during the 15th century were, to some extent, integrated in the new cultural forms developed by the Mughals. However, this integrated culture came under pressure from the religious domestics of the two faiths, as well as from the competing and conflicting interests of various sections in the ruling classes. But that is survived on the whole till the middle of the 19th century is no mean tribute to all those saints, scholars, and enlightened rulers who had helped to build it. The period was also marked by economic development and growth. Trade and manufactures expanded, and there was expansion and improvement of cultivation also. However, the growth was uneven in different areas and during different phases. Apart from the Ganga Valley, where the Mughals spent a substantial part of the revenue resources of the empire, the areas which developed rapidly during the 17th century were Gujarat, the Coromandel Coast, and Bengal. Perhaps it is no accident that these have been the areas in the forefront of the economic development of India in the modern period, particularly in the post independence era. Would India have continued to progress economically and even attained an industrial revolution of its own if the Mughal Empire had continued? While trade and manufactures continued to expand during the 18th century, despite the downfall of the Mughal Empire, it remained backward compared to Europe, not only in the field of science and technology, but in other fields as well. Thus, most of the manufactures remained small in scale with a hardly and machinery, with the workers using the simplest tools as a consequence. However skillful a craftsman might be, his productivity and efficiency remained low, nor could the artisans develop into traders and entrepreneurs as in the West, both because of cash and because most artisans had little by way of capital. This was a reflection of the extremely uneven distribution of money and resulted in the domestic market being limited. During the 17th and 18th centuries, there was a growth of the putting out Dadni system. This increased production but made the artisans increasingly dependent on the merchants, Indian or foreign. It was in these circumstances that the British were able to conquer India and convert it into a colony, supplying raw materials in place of being the manufacturer of the East as it was earlier. It is this ebb and flow which makes the study of history both interesting and rewarding. Thank you.